In this beautiful spring morning, I would like to salute every one of you. You know, I wanted so bad to be original and to stay away from excessive politeness, but looking at this marvelous audience today, I just couldn't. And so, without any cliché whatsoever, I would like to express the honor and pride I feel, or we feel, Sarah and me, by presenting today's much-awaited debate between our school, El Araki International School of Morocco, and the prestigious university, Mohammed VI Polytechnic. As a matter of fact, the great debate formed a guiding light and the school's DNA for more than 13 years. All you need is to defend the position related to a topic and to stand on this podium. Might seem very simple, yet it's not. Because trust me, I can only imagine how many times this podium has witnessed failures and successes. How many times I saw my friends get the most joyful experience here. How many tears and laughs it has witnessed. Well, I feel already overwhelmed by emotions, and we've come here today with the same joy to not only share, but to prove that this experience is nothing short of flourishing.
Today's debate is about freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is the matrix, the indispensable condition of nearly every other form of freedom. Countless justices, commentators, philosophers, and more have waxed eloquent for decades over the critically important role that freedom of speech plays in promoting and maintaining democracy. One point of regular debate is whether there is a free speech breaking point, a line at which the hateful or harmful or controversial nature of speech should cause it to lose its credibility and to be compromised. Let us look at all of it together through the arguments both teams will provide.
Well, that was the motion of the debate in a nutshell. Without further ado, let's leave the floor to both teams. So please give a big round of applause to the government team composed of Ayman Sarawi, Zakaria Mashi, Abdullah Merbouhi, and Zakaria Bouzart.
And now, dear audience, please give a big round of applause to the opposition team composed of Sarah Shena, Umayma Skhman, Aya Badr, and Al Farouk Hamdan. I have the honor to call our director, Mr. Yunus, to choose the opening team.
First of all, hello everyone. We're very glad to be here today and present our faculty. So let's start. Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights asserts that everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference, seek, receive, and impart information from all the medias without boundaries. Expression, opinion, speech, all of these are easily understandable words that we don't need to stop at. However, that's not the case for freedom. What does freedom actually mean? On the surface, freedom means the power to choose and take decisions without constraints. However, if you take a little bit more time to flesh out all the nuances the word holds, you will quickly find out that it means so much more than that. Freedom is responsibility. Freedom is duty. And as any other power, freedom should never be overused or abused. We live in liberal states and democratic states, and many are given the privilege of speaking freely to their citizens. However, if we actually want to save the sacredness of this fundamental right, we need to put limits on it. Do not mistake our advocacy. We are asking for legal, limited speech. We're not for any sort of totalitarian regimes. We're not for a full control of speaking or any kind of censorship. We want legal limits in order to protect the citizens. Because a freedom of speech without limits is a risk for our people. Anyone can come to you and insult your religion, your prophet, your gender, your family, your ethnic group. Are we going to accept that? Are we going to just bend because anyone has the right to say anything? Is this what freedom of speech is about? Is this what we're defending? No. For us, this is absolutely intolerable. Therefore, we are asking for limited freedom of speech. And putting these boundaries is not an option, it's a necessity. Because words do inspire action. If that wasn't the case, then we wouldn't have any huge politicians spending money on their campaign. We wouldn't have billions of dollars going in advertising in order to make people and lead them to a certain path. Words do inspire actions, and speeches can be dangerous because they lead others to act. And we will explain to you why it is necessary to put boundaries on freedom of speech.
I want to fight this adrenaline rush that prevents me from standing still behind this podium, but I can't help feeling this astonishing sensation that thrills me and does certainly not compromise my freedom of speech. In the name of my teammates, dear audience, we are so pleased to have you here among us, as well as our fellow opponents inside our auditorium to discuss a very important topic. We will be dealing with a theme that has stirred up wars and conflicts all around the world, and raised controversy and divided people. Freedom of speech. But first, what is the freedom of speech? The freedom of speech is, according to the Oxford Dictionary, it is the power or right to express one's opinions without restraint, censorship, or legal penalty. And as you said, Miss, it is a fundamental human right stated by the 19th article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But now let me give you an example that depicts the fact that the freedom of speech is very important. The Black Lives Matter movement that started in 2013 by the first use on social media with the hashtag Black Lives Matter. With the use, it became nationally and internationally recognized for the following years. And in 2020, the United States knew more than a month of unrest and protests that started in Minneapolis due to the murder of George Floyd. But the protests continued to encompass all the 50 states of America. Black and white, every single American soul walked down their city to defend the black community's rights. On June 8th, Minneapolis Council President Lisa Bender said, "Our commitment is to end policing as we know it and to recreate systems of public safety that actually keep us safe." Further, in the Big Apple, Mayor de Blasio affirmed that there was clearly more work to do to strengthen trust between officers and the New Yorkers they serve. He also pledged to move funding from the city's police department for youth and social services. Moreover, in Dallas, Texas City, Nevada, and Washington, D.C., officials banned chokeholds and any other air-restricting techniques and changed guidelines on de-escalation, which will include giving people other chances rather than using deadly force. Ladies and gentlemen, dear opponents, this is a proof that the Black Lives Matter is a real-life example that freedom of speech should not be compromised under any circumstances, and that being free to express opinions may contribute in changing the system of a whole state or even a whole country with no bounds. Thank you.
Before starting, I would like to let our opponents know that the Black Lives Matter is a much more nuanced issue than just freedom of speech or not. And I would like you to not lose sight of the prompt of our debate, which is that freedom of speech should not be compromised under any circumstances. And I stress the part of any circumstances. And I would also like to take this minute for us to understand what freedom of speech really is. As per Article 10 of the Human Rights Act, it is a universal fundamental right, and I quote, everyone has the right to freedom of expression, and this right shall include freedom to hold opinions, to receive and impart information and ideas without interference by public authority, and regardless of frontiers. Now, this is just the first paragraph of the article. The second stipulates, and I quote, that the exercise of these freedoms, since it carries with it duties and responsibilities, may be subject to such formalities, conditions, restrictions, or penalties, as prescribed by law and as necessary in a democratic state, in the interest of national security, health, and morale, etc. The point I'm trying to make here is that freedom of speech has always been restricted. It has always been limited. The problem is, that there's no legal framework for these limitations beyond whichever brief statement you might find in a country's constitution. Now, the most prominent aspect of this is that of hate speech. Hate speech can be defined in many ways. We find that the definition that stands most appropriate here is that of the United Nations, and that is any kind of communication in speech, writing, or behavior that attacks or uses discriminatory languages in reference to a person or a group of people on the basis of who they are, so in other words, their race, their gender, their ethnicity, and unfortunately the list goes on. However, things are not that simple, because as of today, we still don't have a universal legal definition of hate speech. And so because of this, rather than prohibiting hate speech such as international law prohibits the incitement to discrimination, hostility, and violence. Now, humans are an extraordinary species, but that doesn't make us any less susceptible to hateful rhetoric. Let's take, for example, the United States. This is a country that prides itself on its freedom, specifically that of speech, to the point where they call themselves the land of the free. Yet since 2016, with the beginning of Trump's presidential campaign, domestic terrorism has more than doubled in the United States. Now, during the Obama administration's 2 terms, the US averaged about 26.6 domestic attacks every year. And that is, of course, according to the Global Terrorism Database. Yet the most active year so far has been 2016, in which the country saw 67 attacks, which is more than double Obama's overall average. And during the first 2 years of Donald Trump's presidency, 2017 and 2018, domestic terror activity stayed just that high at 66 and 67 attacks, respectively. Now, this is just one of many examples of politicians using hate speech for political gain. And we simply cannot keep on pretending that these people don't know what they're doing or that they're simply enjoying their freedoms. Politicians are not stupid. Inflammatory language and hateful rhetoric have been used for decades and are an established technique to mobilize political supporters and disenfranchise and delegitimize political opposition. And they have been used to deepen political polarization and pave the way for political success. Now, take, for example, Argentina in the 70s, during the so-called Dirty War, or Turkey in the late 70s and early 80s, where ultranationalist right-wing organizations and left-leaning movements have attacked each other relentlessly. Hateful rhetoric by political leaders can go as far as precipitate civil wars and genocide, as was the case in Rwanda in the 90s. Unfortunately, physical violence is not the only thing that comes out of this. Because when you have bigoted politicians and policymakers who are allowed to go on making decisions for us without being held accountable for their actions, systemic oppression will thrive. And so we have senates restricting young girls' bodily autonomy in the name of secularism, and we have governments letting war refugees die in the name of territorial security, and we have courtrooms letting murderers walk free because the poor policeman was just doing his job and there's not much we can do about it. And we have rapists And we have molesters roaming the streets in all freedom because misogynistic rhetoric is so rampant in our political circles that we cannot even be bothered to protect our women and give them justice. When hateful speech is rampant, oppression thrives and violence thrives, and I, for one, refuse to see our society go to chaos when the solution is so simple and clear, and that is that we have to legally frame the limitations of free speech. Thank you.
Spoken word on the street is that UMCSP was going to come right here to El Araki International School and debate such a passionate topic. And I couldn't miss that. I couldn't miss welcoming them here to our school, to our playground. And no need to be stressed, no need to shake around or anything, because I don't think you understand the memories this podium right here holds. Just thinking about it, I'm already lost of words. I remember my first ever debate. Actually, not really the topic. It was something around the lines, will science help the development of society? But what I do really remember is the reason why I first started debating. And it was because I wanted to share my opinions with the world without knowing that there was some sort of police officer right here holding me at gunpoint saying, hey, you better not speak about the economic crisis the world is going through right now or else I'm going to shoot your brains out. And it wasn't really that, or it wasn't really another police officer coming from this side and telling me, hey, you better not speak about the Uyghur Muslims and everything they have been going through during these last couple of years, or else we're going to shoot your brains out. Well, I am here and I'm going to defend every single cause, and I'm going to have to put both of your guns down, because I don't think I want to remind you what happened the last time people tried to silence us. Let me give you some hints to your opponents. Germany, Mustache Man. 1941, 1945, Primo Levi. What else? Auschwitz. It starts with an H, ends with a T. Any idea? I am, of course, referencing the massive genocide that happened and that lasted 4 years, the Holocaust. If Hitler let his people speak about what was really happening and wasn't killing or imprisoning every single one of its citizens who spoke badly about the Holocaust, maybe it would have just lasted 2 months or even 3, but it lasted 4 years. And it really, really hurts me to know that you guys are going to be the future leaders of this country. You guys are going to be representing this country. You're going to go to big conferences with this big misconception that freedom of speech should be restrained. And I'm really scared for the future of our country, because if that's really the case, then I don't think Morocco is going to keep developing anymore. Needless to say, what every Moroccan is going to do is just come here, grab his passport, choose a random location on the map, travel straight to it, and go without looking back. And I don't think we want that today. Because after all, if you keep this attitude up to your opponents, we're all good. This is what's going to happen. We don't want to deal with any of this, and I'm the first of it. I'm the first person to not want to deal with this whole idea that freedom of speech, my basic human right, that you guys were somehow able to flip the script so easily, talking about how it is really necessary, it is really fundamental for both democracy and human rights. And then for some reason, I don't even know how, you guys just made it seem like freedom of speech is not a human right anymore. I'm sorry, but that's crazy. So I'm gonna grab my passport, travel to Turkey, and I'll see you guys somewhere in the world, because I want to be free of this oppression. Thank you.
First of all, please make a little bit more efforts to what we're saying. We are asking for legal limitations, and I understand that maybe as high school students, the concept of international law may not be a concept that you all are familiar with. So I'm gonna try to make things clearer for you guys. This comes as no surprise for anyone here, or at least I hope so, but there are many, many aspects to the harm that can be brought upon individuals or groups due to unrestricted free speech. Let's take, for example, blasphemy. In most Western countries, blasphemy is known as nothing more than a way of expressing our thoughts and our religious beliefs. As we know, a religious belief is nothing more than an ideology and can therefore be criticized. However, more religious institutions draw the line at blasphemy, considering that it has brought in a lot of ways, oppression and pressure on perhaps less integrated communities within the West. Harmless blasphemy and honest criticism can easily slip out of control and therefore become one of many favorite smear tactics amongst disapprovers of organized religion, as well as being used as a way of hiding religious prejudice and sometimes even blatant bigotry behind the name of free speech. Now let's take a look at France, for example. It is the perfect representation of an openly oppressive organization that is hiding behind the name of free speech. Charlie Hebdo. I think we are all familiar with the big controversy that happened a few years ago. For it being unnecessarily provocative and seeking to normalize discrimination against minorities. Islamophobia has now become mainstream. And although the widespread, the very famous slogan, Je suis Charlie, first started as a response to Islamist threats, it is now unfortunately becoming almost a symbol of hate against Muslims and Muslim communities. This is a striking example of the way that boundaries between honest criticism of extremism and Islamophobia are now becoming very blurry and almost non-existent. Given, therefore, more room for a liberal Islamophobia to arise and spread even more. Said Islamophobia conceals traditional racism and religious prejudice by constructing a pseudo-progressive narrative that is perpetuating stereotypical images of Muslims all around the world. As an opposition to the core values of the West that are said being rightful and stand for a homogeneous culture. This fantasized picture of the West portrays democracy, freedom, and human rights, which is very ironic since these political systems themselves are inherently oppressive. This liberal Islamophobia claims to be a way to more freedom and equality, but equality cannot come at the expense of millions of people who are openly shamed for their religious beliefs. The cartoons affair has given right-wing voice the opportunity to jump at the neo-racist narrative, and it is unfortunately creating very, very deep divisions within the country. So yes, freedom of speech, when used in a biased environment and context, can be an excuse for illiberal practices and a way to justify racialization and profiling. We can take as an example the anti-radicalism bill that has been adopted within the French government that is deliberately stigmatizing. On the other hand, let's take anti-Semitism since you talked about the Holocaust, right? It is a huge issue amongst the world nowadays, and it is very hard to draw the line between acceptable lawful speech and unlawful speech. In fact, a campaign had arisen amongst many American colleges where anti-Zionist Jews has been discriminated against and unrightfully used for very, very dishonest political ends. The distinction between an opinion and intimidation is still not quite well assimilated by people nowadays. And now, it is very seriously discussed to put boundaries to freedom of speech as a part of a review of hate crime. That is why we have stated again and again that words are not simply just that, and we need to strive, and to strive for better as small communities and also as a society as a whole, because this has got to stop. Thank you.
Word has come that some university students are saying, I kid you not, freedom of speech should be compromised. Never have I ever thought I would see the day where a debater, a fierce intellectual soldier, is seeking to limit the quintessence of what he does best. A debater is seeking to limit freedom of speech and therefore hinder his ability to debate. But other than this huge mishap that our dear opponents have overlooked, there's something even more important, something even more prominent. Let's just say that for the sake of my argument, the against aisle is right. They have the righteous position and we are wrong, hypothetically speaking, because it's ridiculous. So that means that in fact, freedom of speech should be compromised. So the logical question that follows is, when do we compromise speech? What are the conditions to limit someone's speech? And for that, there is only one reasonable answer. The condition is that they disagree with us. Let me explain by giving you a little example. Let's say that, for instance, or for example, that 7-year-old Suleiman likes strawberry. He adores strawberry, and in case you haven't noticed, Suleiman likes strawberry. He always talks about it. Then comes Mu'ad, who also likes strawberry. So the two are agreeing, they're living happily, and nothing bothers them. However, once Zakaria, who likes bananas, steps into the conversation, there will be mere discontent. Mu'ad and Suleiman will be unhappy. Now, at first, the strawberry faction will try to convince the banana man that strawberries are better, but when it's going to be in vain, the next result will be to silence him down. So what's the moral of the story? The moral is people will never seek to compromise the speech of people they agree with. Compromisation of speech will only work against people you disagree with. And you might think that this is just an imaginary extreme case that I'm trying to coax you into believing. Rest assured, my imagination isn't that fertile, and this example is stemming from real-life events. You all know China. China is a force to be reckoned with, over 1.4 billion people and a booming, flourishing economy. China adopts the socialist regime. This means that anyone who dares defy its values and philosophy is silenced down. And this has resulted in over 13 million Uyghur Muslims getting slaughtered left and right, getting oppressed in China. So why, you might ask, why are Muslims, our brethren, getting oppressed? Why is their freedom of speech under fire? The Chinese government says, which is a legal framework, just like you said, they say that it's because they pose a threat to the country's unity. But if truth be told, it's because they disagree with Muslims. While we are fasting Ramadan in serenity, everyone is happy fasting with their families, they are torn apart. The Uyghur Muslims can't even tell other people that they're Muslims. It's fear. And I don't want to live in fear. I want to live in a free world. And just before I can conclude my intervention, I heard Miss, I don't know the name, sorry, but I heard her say that we are high schoolers, therefore we don't know what international law is. I, for one, wouldn't trust people who hold such prejudiced thoughts in their heads. And if anything, you can see that this is a perfect opportunity, as I didn't want to compromise their speech, their hate speech, I might say. We're just trying to refute their speech with speech. It's freedom of speech, everyone, and it's a free world. Thank you.
Now, dear opponents, it feels like you're not actually listening to us, and you're basically just ignoring half our position, because we never said that states were supposed to control everything we say. We're just saying that states are supposed to limit our freedom of speech because we're not supposed to be debating about everything, let's say. Now, why don't you relax, close your eyes, and let me guide you through a story I have for you today. You're a Greek man born almost 500 years before Christ. You're born in the land of democracy, where freedom is central and where everyone has the right to participate to the affairs of the city. You were born in the land of the pioneers of freedom of speech. So you're thinking that that right given to you by your community is absolute. You go on and revel in your right to freedom of speech by walking around and asking questions to any stranger willing to listen. And you're thinking, this is it. This is my way to uncover the truths about life and everything that concerns it. After all, what could possibly go wrong? You're protected by your right to free speech, so you should be fine. Not so much, since after a few years, in 399 before Christ to be precise, you're indicted for failing to honor the Athenian gods and for corrupting the youth. Some of you may have recognized this story as being that of Socrates, who died for asking too many questions, or more perhaps, died for asking the wrong questions too many times. But wait a second. If Socrates died in ancient Greece for overusing his right to free speech, was speech really free in ancient Greece? If it is not, then what are we to think of free speech to begin with, since it was practically invented by ancient Greeks for democracy and by Athenian democracy? Does that mean that freedom of speech was invented to never be respected? However, life went on with or without freedom of speech, but unfortunately without Socrates. Until 1791, where the Bill of Rights, a document composed of 10 of the amendments of the American Constitution, was adopted, making freedom of speech a constitutional right. To be precise, the First Amendment says that Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech. It is invoked by many people as being the proof of absolute freedom of speech, but it ultimately isn't. In fact, on multiple occasions, US courts have came up with limitations to freedom of speech. These limitations include obscenity, for example, defined in 1973 by the US Supreme Court as what appeals to the prurient mind, what depicts in offensive way sexual conduct, and what has no artistic, literary, political, or scientific value. We can also talk about lies, which are not protected by the First Amendment, since lying under an oath is considered a criminal offense, and many other. Now, today, the era of fake news and conspiracy theories brought about a new burden to freedom of speech. Since in 2020, many examples of lawsuits condemning misinformation happened, like that of American voting equipment companies falsely accused by Donald Trump and his allies of rigging the elections, which ultimately pushed them to file a series of defamation lawsuits against the accusers. Or, to bring the matter closer to us, Muna Ima's lawsuit, which accused her of having published false content through information systems and objecting to the execution of the work ordered by the public authority, and who was sentenced to 1 year in prison. Now, realistically speaking, we see that nowhere and never has there been a single society or community with uncontained, unlimited freedom of speech. From the pioneers of free speech that were the ancient Greeks to our modern civilizations, states have always felt the need to find the balance between order and liberalism. So why, I am asking you, why would anyone ever advocate for what has never been and most probably will never be? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to remember when we said illegal limitations, but in vain. And also news, ladies and gentlemen, according to our opposition, limitating isn't controlling. Anyway, let's get to my speech. Ladies and gentlemen, I am deeply honored to have this opportunity to lift up your spirits from all of the problems happening in this world. Nowadays, here we are debating a topic that has given us this very chance, the chance to speak our minds, that has screamed loud and high that nothing can't be discussed, a value that humanity has dedicated its whole longing into achieving it. And here comes the opposition team to slice and bash all of that effort, saying that it should be restricted, stepping on an effort that has cost many lives, compromising freedom of speech, speaking these two words one after another as if it makes sense. Compromising and freedom of speech, two polar opposites that our opponents have held firmly in one sentence, only to see that that very sentence has crumbled, chipping away, compromising from freedom of speech as it should. I will be giving you guys a history lesson, so please listen close. 1500s, Nicolaus Copernicus, considered to be the father of modern astronomy, multiply persecuted by the church for heresy against it, which made him unable to work fully in his researches. 1600s, Galileo Galilei, considered to be the father of modern science, later to be executed for heresy against it. 1700s, during the period of Enlightenment, François-Marie Arouet, otherwise known as Voltaire, who greatly influenced the direction of Europe, as he is credited to be the architect of the revolution, later to be executed for treason. Moving on to Rousseau, who was multiply persecuted but somehow influenced the Declaration of Independence. And last but certainly not least, the man who shaped the modern democratic government, Montesquieu, also persecuted, just because they spoke words of wisdom in a time where freedom of speech was compromised. So ladies and gentlemen, I would like to receive your deduction of the following comparison to be a choice made by your own free will, choosing between two realities. Their reality, a word with restriction of freedom, meaning going back to being Neanderthals, or our reality, A world where you are free, not afraid of tigers attacking you or the police arresting you if you speak your mind. A free state, one with absolute freedom of speech. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to tackle the fact that you guys have been overlooking, which is none other than the opportunity that freedom of speech gives us. I would like to portray it as extreme sadness or sorrow. What are the remedies of that? Speaking to someone. And what would the consequence of all those feelings bottling up be? I would say suicide or murder. Well, it's the same. Freedom of speech permits the human to speak his bottled up opinions, avoiding the harsh outcome that will lead to all those opinions exploding. Now, dear audience, do you actually realize the severeness of what the opposition is demanding? To run back the tape, to commit more crimes against the human rights and science, to compromise what has given our workers their rights, to compromise what has given the LGBTQ community some freedom, to compromise what has stood against several racist injustice, what has given to George Floyd, what belongs to George Floyd, justice, hope for other African Americans, and a moment of joy in the hood. So, ladies and gentlemen, the choice is yours. You can choose to walk our path, the path overflown by the bald eagle, leading you to the great Statue of Liberty, or the dark path, putting your tongue in shackles and ending up in more holocausts, genocides, inequality, and injustice. And last but certainly not least, I am here standing right in front of you with 8 arms, reaching to put this hand in front of my mouth and limit my natural right, but being shut down because this mouth speaks limitlessly. Thus, I truly believe that you guys should stray away from hiding behind the awfully unrealistic possibility of a freedom of speech being compromised and accept the fact that everything is discussable. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is an indissociable factor from democracy, granting us a gathering of all the words that my colleagues have started their intervention and ended their intervention with. A freely spoken word in a bound free world. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. So, I see that you guys are really worried about your freedom and your speech and your safety, and as a future leader, as you took time to highlight, I'll promise you, you're going to be safe, because I'm not going to let anyone shame you for your beliefs. You're going to be free to criticize me and hate me even, but not shame me and my family and my beliefs. You're going to be free to express yourself in limits, just like this debate, we can express ourselves but not insult each other. We are trying to get a free, limited freedom of speech because this is what's right for everyone, whether we agree or not. Thank you.
Miss, you talked about Islamophobia, etc., but at least Muslims in France are able to express their religion, to defend their religion, and to discuss religion. What if we talk about a country where religion is banned? They're not even able, which is North Korea, by the way. They're not even able to discuss religion. They're not even able to open any Bible or Quran or I don't know, inside of North Korea. Let's take a moment and describe this country. I mean, let me give you some points from this country. It is led by the supreme leader Kim Jong-un. The Hermit Kingdom is the territory of tyranny and maltreatment. It is the most strict country in the world. They have no connection with the outer world because they don't have any Wi-Fi or social media. They're talking about politics is a sin. In fact, between 150,000 and 200,000 people are in prisons because they talked about politics and diplomacy, and they talked about the emperor or the supreme leader. They insulted him or something, because they were free to speak. They took their freedom and they enjoyed it at its maximum. But do you know that if the North Korean people had the opportunity to speak and protest for their rights, believe me, they would have raised and started a revolution a long time ago. Their opponents' freedom of speech is essential. It should never be compromised under any circumstances. And this is another real-life example. What do you prefer? Being insulted, Islamophobia, or dictatorship? And no Islam, no religion, no speak, no electricity, poverty, and many other more problems and social and economical problems. Thank you so much.